Welcome to Hamburger Business Review Season 2. I'm your host, Mike Merrill.
And I'm your host, Zach Rose. This season, we're back to review the business of McDonald's and how this restaurant affects our lives.
Ray Kroc said, "Whatever we're doing today, we can do better tomorrow." And in that spirit, we've brought on producer Chris Higgins this season to make the podcast even better and to keep us on track.
I'm producer Chris Higgins, here to keep these guys apparently on track. Let's get started with the news.
We have this terrible news coming out of the Colorado-Nebraska region where there's an E. coli outbreak linked to the Quarter Pounder. This story is still breaking, but the initial investigations reveal this is related to possibly the slivered onions, which is a different onion product than used on items like some of the smaller burgers or the Big Mac.
And I want to jump in here, Mike. You have expertise in hamburger restaurants, and I'm curious if you can talk a little bit to different onion products that exist in these stores.
So my understanding as an employee of a hamburger restaurant is the onions come into the restaurant pre-cut. So these slivered onions are more of what you might think of as a traditional onion. They have a little bit of a curve to them. They're a bit of a larger shape.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's these diced onions that are almost fit through like a shaker.
Right, like the little mini square ones.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I think of when I think of that like McDonald's thing. I think of that really tiny cut little onion thing.
Those tiny little ones have not been indicated as a possible source. It's just these slivered onions.
Gotcha.
Something I learned somewhat recently, I have a bit of an onion obsession. I'm obsessed with onion futures. Well, actually the lack of onion futures. Huge tangent we won't get into. But there are actually, the different sizes of onions are all named. There's like jumbo, giant, etc. There's like a special size onion that's used for the bloomin' onion.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I suspect that these slivered onions are one of those specific sizes, though I wasn't able to find out exactly. So it probably comes from a different supplier than the smaller onions, which is just a more probably put through a machine turned into these small little squares.
It's amazing that almost feels like a Michelin 3-star onion operation to get them into the perfect tiny cubes that aren't crushed with a perfectly sharp blade. It's sort of impressive to think about.
Yeah, you'd think it'd be very difficult to do that at scale.
Well, but then once you figure it out once, it's probably a super easy process to repeat over and over and over again.
Well, depends on the variability in the supply chain, which we're going to get to later. This story just broke on October 22nd, so everything is still very much under investigation. So far, one person has died. And according to the CDC, at least 10 people hospitalized, 49 people sickened across 10 states.
We know from last season that McDonald's uses these regional suppliers for all of their products. For example, in Portland, Oregon, there's Fran's Bakery, which is beloved by locals, and it's most famous for baking the bun that broke the world's longest hot dog record in 2006. But it also makes the buns for a lot of the fast food companies in the area, including McDonald's. And so in looking at this story, it seems like we're seeing the impact of the McDonald's supply chain. And it's interesting to then see, can you figure out where that center is based on the region that's been affected?
Mike, that is exactly what McDonald's is saying in a recently released statement. Cesar Pina, the chief supply chain officer, said that this may be linked to the slivered onions used in the Quarter Pounder and sourced by a single supplier that serves 3 distribution centers. And if you look at a map, you can see that Colorado appears to be hit hardest. I think there's one case in Oregon, maybe some cases in the surrounding states of Colorado.
I feel like there's a certain inevitability to these kinds of stories. Like anytime you have a food operation at this scale, which obviously creates so many business advantages, profits, massive companies, you also have this risk of kind of monoculture within that food distribution network. And so if you imagine a world of fully independent restaurants, you'd have far less penetration of like tainted goods, but you'd also have a much harder time finding the source of any potential outbreaks.
And as expected, this has caused a major slide in McDonald's stock price. After holding over $300 per share for about a month, the price has dropped about 7%.
I actually bought some shares when I woke up this morning, which, it feels weird profiting off of an illness and an E. coli outbreak, but I just feel like there's a strong chance that McDonald's is going to recover very quickly, and this is a temporary opportunity to essentially buy McDonald's shares on sale.
really don't want this podcast to become a Jim Cramer McDonald's pitch, so I will abstain from any recommendations one way or the other. But this is probably a good time to disclaim that Mike and I both own shares of McDonald's that we buy and sell.
And Chris does not.
No recommendation. I'm not saying you should do it. Buying individual stocks is a dumb practice.
See, that's where I'm at. That's my whole thing.
Yeah, if you're buying a single stock, you're making a mistake, and I'm just letting you know I am actively choosing to make that mistake.
Agreed.
You're modeling poor behavior for the other hamburger enthusiasts.
And we'll see how it goes.
This also goes back to my whole thing of finding a way to tie McDonald's into my life. I realize that it's a bad practice to invest in one stock, but with that stock, I get a dividend every quarter. With that dividend, I can go to eat at McDonald's, and then I wind up eating McDonald's 4 or 5 days a year instead of whenever.
And it's free, essentially.
I like to think of it as kind of like a mutualism, maybe a symbiosis. I'm the little guy on the belly of the whale.
I'm just saying, you hold the stock, they pay you the dividend. You take the dividend money and turn it into food, which then helps raise the stock. Seems like a pretty beneficial system. They should just give out Big Mac coupons instead of any kind of dividend.
Right. Speaking of which, I am aware, Mike, that you recently got a job at a hamburger restaurant, and that's why I'm here. I am very curious about how that's going, and I have some specific questions to get into. First question, it is currently October 23rd. How long have you been working at a hamburger restaurant?
It's been about 3 weeks. The first week was training, which I watched a lot of videos about various things, and then had a couple shifts working with someone showing me things, and then was very quickly kind of thrown into it in the last 2 weeks.
And I'm curious, the previous episode, y'all talked about Kamala Harris and talking about the message discipline of some folks work at McDonald's she worked for pocket money while she was a student in college. Other folks are supporting a family. And I'm curious, economically, if you can put this in context of like, what's going on in your life and what does having this job mean to you right now?
Man, it feels like such a existential question, things that I've even talked about in therapy, but it's primarily to get a job. I've been, I like to say, underemployed since probably like 2017. I had a short full-time job. I've had a lot of part-time gigs. I've done some various things for money that were all short-term. And I have primarily benefited from having a partner who makes a high income and has sort of subsidized my life for a long time. And that's been obviously amazing, but is not sustainable, especially there's a big strike in her industry. Things are very up and down. And so I started being like, okay, I need to get something, and I needed to get something soon. And sending resumes out into the world right now and trying to apply for jobs, I just got I think I got one actual reply saying no, and just for the other dozen plus, just nothing.
Yeah.
And so my own morale just started to drop. I was just like, this sucks. Like, I'm starting to feel like it's reinforcing a feeling I already had of like, I'm not worthy, right? I'm not worth the money that they want to pay for these various roles. And so I started thinking, and I think this podcast was definitely part of it. I was like, well, I'm pretty sure I can get hired at a hamburger restaurant. They're always hiring. There's relatively high turnover. I think this will happen. California this year passed a law enacting a $20 minimum wage for fast food, which seems very high within the context of that job. And I thought, why not? There's an aspect of like, one of the things I like about it is it's a job that doesn't define you. I feel like most of the sort of professional managerial class jobs in either tech or media, you go into those kind of salaried positions and you are expected to sort of rep the company. Your identity becomes, oh, I work at X, Y, Z.
Right.
I am a whatever. I am a senior thingamajig.
Exactly. And I do it here, and this is our mission. And, especially coming from tech and software, like that was very much part of it. And I kind of wanted to turn that off and say, I clock in, I work, I leave. Now, ironically, through this podcast and through the sort of novelty within my social circle of having this job, it has become even more my identity. Mm-hmm. But that is my choice as opposed to being imposed on me from the sort of corporate structure. In fact, I think they would prefer if I didn't talk about it.
Sure. But I think that's really interesting that the sense that you're doing an honest day's labor for a good paycheck. I mean, what else can we ask for as workers, right?
The identification I have with country music has changed in the couple of weeks that I've had this job.
Tell me more.
There is so much in those lyrics and in those songs about just work. Like you just do the work and you clock in, you clock out. Mm-hmm. I was listening to some song about shifts and it was talking about, like 11 to 7, whatever it was, just like the 3 round the clock shifts and showing clips of various people just working like construction or service jobs and all these different things.
Totally.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh, like that's me. I'm part of that world now.
Dolly Parton, 9 to 5.
Yeah. Well, one time I interviewed a guy who's a Tetris pro, and his day job is he works at the 3M blue tape factory. And I was like, what do you mean, the blue tape? And he said, well, you know that blue painter's tape that you put down when you paint to not paint the wrong thing? I make 1/3 of all of it. Like I run the machine, I supervise the thing, and it's a 3-shift operation. So by definition, my plant makes all of it. Or at least in North America or whatever. And I thought, so I have your product in my house right now. He's like, yes, definitely, 100%. Like, do you have 3 rolls of blue tape? You do.
That's amazing.
Right.
That's amazing.
Isn't it? Because then you start to think about the built environment and you think, oh, all these objects come from somewhere.
Yes.
And it turns out there's a 3M blue tape factory and wherever. So I mean, another thing I'm curious about here is when I think about a hamburger restaurant, I think about kind of the diversity of the crew in different ways. One of those is age. And I'm aware that you worked at a hamburger restaurant, I guess like as a teenager, right?
Yeah, I worked in part-time in high school.
At McDonald's, if I'm right?
Yeah, at McDonald's in high school. Yeah, it was...
like when is that, 94 or something?
Yeah, it would have been like, I think 93 to 95. I recently put it on my LinkedIn because even though I don't know the exact dates,
in this political climate, you never know when people are going to be coming for your McDonald's credentials. It's as good to get that on the record as soon as you can.
Right.
So I worked at 2 different McDonald's because we moved partway through high school. I worked at one in Soldotna, Alaska, and then I worked at one in Sitka, Alaska. And the interesting thing about the one in Sitka is a very small town in Southeast Alaska and does not have a lot of restaurants. So this was one of the very last McDonald's to serve pizza at McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And so, which meant there was a wider drive-through window to accommodate pizza boxes. And there was also mozzarella cheese. So one of my favorite, internal burgers was to do a 1/4 pounder with the mozzarella cheese on it.
Oh, wow. Mm. Do you get to make up a hamburger now? Do you get an internal sandwich now at your hamburger restaurant?
I try to bring my lunch every day to my hamburger restaurant just because...
It's the sodium for me.
Okay, wait. Okay.
That food is a great treat.
Yeah.
That is not everyday food.
I help me understand this. I've never worked at a restaurant. I've worked next to a lot of restaurants in like sound reinforcement. And one of the great benefits, like in college, I got this job where they gave you a little lanyard where you could walk next door to this food court that had a hamburger restaurant, a couple other things. And you could just get free food because you were by definition working your shift. And that was the most amazing thing that happened in my freaking life, That was such maybe I guess I was 18 or something. So that's probably a factor. But did you get a meal when you were a teenager? Did you eat the food then?
Oh, definitely.
But you don't eat it now?
I will dabble in a breakfast item every once in a while, but yeah, I try to avoid it.
But give me more. So when you say every once in a while, like, are we eating hamburger restaurant food like on a weekly basis?
Maybe once a week I'll have one item. And
is that more or less than when you didn't work at before the job?
It's definitely more because it was effectively zero before, very rare or kind of on a social occasion. So yeah, I would say it's a slight increase, but I'm definitely more aware of it, and I definitely find myself trying not to do it, which is pretty hard when it's free. But again, I think if you look at a traditional restaurant, like a sit-down place with staff, they have what's known as family meal, which is they're not serving what they're serving on the menu, because those are, when you go out to eat, you're generally getting kind of a higher salt, higher fat, more delicious, amazing, well-crafted, like
right.
This food that's meant to kind of blow your mind.
Right. You don't want to eat that every day.
You're not supposed to eat that rich every day. And so you kind of need something that's just a little bit simpler and heartier than that.
Do you ever bring home a menu item for someone else? You know what I mean? Like if you have access to a free thing, are you using the free thing, or are you just completely being like, no, I'm not into it?
I've thought about bringing home, we do have ice cream at my hamburger restaurant. I've thought about bringing Catherine home an ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Catherine is obsessed with the ravens that live near our house and has occasionally put out some food for them with a little sign that says, "For corvids only."
Uh-huh.
And so I have thought about bringing home some French fries so that she can make friends with the ravens. I haven't done that yet.
If you have ice cream at home, you might as well bring home an apple pie.
I mean, that's a great point.
That's one of the few vegan options on the menu, I believe.
That's true. There are, that's it, yeah. I haven't done it yet.
These are both really good like homework assignments. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but I mean, bringing things home for your partner to interact with the wilderness is great. Or just eat.
Other than high school, like this is the first time I've worked at a restaurant, and I haven't eaten all the food on the menu. And I kind of feel like I should, but I don't want to rush through that.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel a certain obligation to be like, I want to know what that tastes like. I also want to investigate the ingredients.
Right.
Some people are like, what's on the blank? And I'm like, I don't know, regular stuff. Like I should know the menu better.
Food. Uh-huh.
I'm curious, could you ask for a mozzarella burger at your restaurant? Could you make something like that happen?
There's so many substitutions that have, all the food is, effectively standard, but you can substitute almost anything for anything.
Like you can go through the system to get something crazy.
Yeah, there's this wonderful button on the ordering system internal called Special Request. And I'm usually in the drive-thru. And so you hit Special Request, and then you can just tell the kitchen crew what you need.
Oh, cool. Good to know.
Don't abuse that. Please don't abuse that.
I'm still curious about this age thing. Thinking back to when you're in high school, probably there's people of all ages working at these kinds of jobs, right? And I'm wondering, so wait, what age are you now?
I am 47 now.
Okay. So like 30 years later, you show back up, you are now the silver-haired guy. Do you remember if there was like a crew member back then that you thought like, oh man, that's the middle-aged person, right? And now you occupy that space.
I definitely remember that there were fellow kids and adults.
Mm-hmm.
It had this feeling that the sort of teens and younger people were sort of transient, kind of always churning through. And then there were like the pros that were there.
Mm-hmm.
And
lifers.
Yeah. And I feel like that's true also now. And I don't know where I fit into that because I feel like I sort of blend that in that I'm obviously older than the teens, but I don't know anything. And so I have essentially no skills at the hamburger restaurant that I'm still learning a lot. Everything has changed.
Despite the lack of skill, do you feel like you have a desire to do better than they do?
Oh, definitely. So that's another big difference between, I would say, the pros and the teens. And some of the teens are pros. I'm just using those as general categories. But I usually start in the morning on the breakfast shift, and the crew is so tight and so pro, and they're proactive and they're doing things, and it's fast paced and it's amazing. And then I see this shift as some of the afternoon people come in, and it's some of the younger people sometimes who are just like, they're equally as good, but there's less enthusiasm. They're just as skilled, but there's not the same level of sort of proactive enthusiasm, even though they're doing, if any kind of measurement that you set other than vibe, they would hit all those benchmarks.
But there's not that sparkle in their eye.
Exactly.
Do you think maybe there's a leadership for a certain Mike Merrill to convert some of those dull-eyed teens into starry-eyed pros?
I definitely feel like my teen self would have certainly been more drawn to the other people who have that certain lack of sparkle.
Okay.
And now I find myself way more drawn to, what I consider the sort of pros who are deep in it.
You mentioned that you bring your lunch. Okay, A, what's in the lunch? And B, where are you eating this lunch if you're in a burger restaurant? Are you among the customers? Is there like a secret place? Do you have to take it outside? Do you have to microwave? Can you microwave? You know what I mean? Like, what's going on there?
So I bring a small Tupperware container that I reuse. Catherine will often put a little piece of tape sticker on it with a note, which is very cute. Sometimes she will even prep it for me.
Oh.
But I do like a weekly meal prep, and it's the most boring food. It is just chicken, brown rice, broccoli, hardly any seasoning or anything on it. Like I kind of crave the most, I just want sustenance and food and not much else. I've dabbled with like getting different sauces from the Hamburger Restaurant and putting it on there, and it's almost too rich and too much. I'm like, nope, I just want it. It's like a monk, in the monastery. Just like, I just need the calories in order to continue. So that's my lunch. There's a break room with a little changing area that's in the back. I think we're not allowed to eat in the front. Although I have seen one or two people who I think are off shift out there.
How long's the lunch break?
30 minutes unpaid. And then you get a 10-minute paid break every 2 hours, I think it is. And it's super regulated. Like everyone's always paranoid about like, have you taken your break? Have you not? Because it's all tracked and part of California legal system. And yeah, it was the initial big focus was people coming and checking to make sure I'd taken my break.
I'm curious about the clothing situation. And that there's a lot of parts to that, because one part of it is like, what do they make you wear, if anything? And also, assuming they make you wear something, do you wear that while you're commuting to work? Do you wear it like, also, I've worked a lot of jobs where, after you've worked the job, you now are redolent. You have a stench of the job on you. For me, it was like working in clubs in the 90s, you'd get like cigarette smoke and beer on you. And then when you'd like go home, you'd realize, oh, my clothes are destroyed because now I smell like my work. Is that happening for you? When do you put on and take off the outfit, and what is the outfit?
The full uniform provided, again, I think there's a legal requirement around that.
Okay.
Yeah, if they require it, they have to provide it. I work at a restaurant. My Hamburger Restaurant's owned by the corporate ownership structure. It's not a separately owned franchise of the corporation. So they actually do everything super by the book in this really, somewhat rigid way where they don't take advantage of any of the flexibility that an independent franchisee operator might. So they're kind of using the latest version of the uniform. It's weirdly kind of reminds me of like a teen Star Trek vibe. It's a little
like a Wesley Crusher situation.
Yeah, it's got a little tiny collar on it with almost like a little Henley zip up,
like a cycling jersey.
A short sleeve, really synthetic material that's kind of shiny, like Next Generation Star Trek. But then it's these dark jeans, but they're super stretchy, also very synthetic. These absolutely insane non-slip shoes. Like I didn't understand the concept of non-slip shoes until I got a pair of these, which are, the floor in there is always slippery. Like it's a restaurant. They're always mopping. It's wet. Something about these magic non-slip shoes is incredible traction. Like I was walking back off shift and scuffed my foot along the concrete and almost tripped because it stuck so hard in a way that I was not used to at all.
Oh,
wow.
So it's adding some kind of grip. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's whatever the magic of a non-slip shoe material is.
What color are the shoes?
Black, just all black.
And the pants, are they like a jean color?
Like a dark jean material, yeah. And then I wear a gray shirt. If you're a trainer, you get like a yellow version of that shirt, and then managers wear like a dark blue color.
Really?
And so again, it feels very Star Trek in that way. Oh, and then
exactly, yeah.
Oh, but then even better is there are these guys that were in there that had this like dark blue polo with like reflective stripes, diagonal stripes on the sleeve. And I was like, that shirt looks rad. I want one of those. But they're doing kind of all the heavy maintenance, like emptying grease stuff.
Infrastructure.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, these are like the engineers of Star Trek.
That's so cool.
And I was putting this in putting all this together in my mind. I actually have this theory that in the Star Trek universe, Starfleet is actually an offshoot of McDonald's because post the apocalypse, it was the only organization around, and a non-corporate driven McDonald's would actually have a lot in common with Star Trek. And then the Vulcans came in, but McDonald's is a corporation, so used to consultants like McKinsey. They were happy to take the advice. Anyway, separate theory.
That's kind of like by and large in Wall-E.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I generally will, when I wake up in the morning, I wake up at 5:30 in the morning.
Do you do that anyway, or is that a new thing?
No, that's definitely a new thing. That is a new and painful thing.
Okay, so before, what would it have been? Like if you had your choice?
So I am a morning person. I get my best work done in the morning. I would try to get up by 7 and often not until 9, especially based on the schedule of my partner. You know, it was largely based on that. Also, I love to take naps. I love to sleep generally. So yeah, waking up at 5:30 was, well, at first I would wake up at 6:30, which gave me enough time to do everything and get to work. What I realized was I can't go straight into work without some time under my own control in the morning. So now I wake up at 5:30 to give myself an hour of time, and then I go into work. So I wake up, I've prepped the coffee maker, so I flip on the coffee maker, and then I go and kind of do all of the, deodorant, showering, with all that stuff, bathroom stuff, and then immediately put on the corporate pants, shoes, etc., but not the shirt. So I wear my own shirt and my own hat into the restaurant, and then I change there into the top because I don't feel like walking around in public with my full regalia on.
Right. Someone might ask you to make an order, or ask you for customer service.
Well, what's funny is I considered also working at the post office, and I had this fantasy of wearing the uniform, like to the bar, like very Cliff Clavin kind of thing. And I guess I'm just a little bit embarrassed about working at a hamburger restaurant.
Oh, you shouldn't be.
Like there's something about it where I'm hiding it just a little bit out in public.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I'm working on getting over that. In fact,
by doing a podcast where you discuss it in great depth. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's also smilemakers.com where you can get officially licensed McDonald's merch and clothing that is not available, like not just given to employees, but you can buy it for a small amount. You should get some of that.
You can also, hot tip. All of the uniforms and clothing, both for Smilemakers, but also internally, at least on the West Coast, comes from this company called Way to Be. It's outside of Oakland. It's a 100% African-American owned business. And they have a retail outlet where you can actually buy almost everything.
Oh.
It's amazing. So I actually do have 3 pairs of themed socks, that one of which Catherine bought for me and 2 of which I bought for myself.
And if you're listening, Way to Be, we'd be happy to set you up with a promo code system.
Also, though, I bought inserts for my shoes.
Like orthotics?
Yeah, like standing for, the entire shift is difficult. And I also, for the first time in my life, bought compression socks.
Okay. So like the kind you would take on an international flight kind of thing?
Yeah.
Do they go all the way up to your knee? Is that what you've got?
Yeah, I have to roll them down a little bit. They're actually too long.
A little too big.
The inserts I don't think help. I think the actual inserts on the regular shoe are better. The compression socks seem to really help.
Really? In what way?
And I read this all on subreddit threads about working in restaurants and all this kind of crazy stuff.
So what is different, do you think, wearing them versus not?
I woke up, I think the second week, with just the worst Charlie horse in my hamstring. And I'm just I haven't had a job where I have to stand that much. Like I'm standing the entire time.
Right.
And yeah, I think there's just a general leg tightness and swelling in the legs that happens. And so this is countering that to some effect. It's strangely hard, even though millions of people do it every day,
Sure.
Yeah.
It's so weird because to call any of this stuff difficult, it's like, but everyone's doing it. So there's a little bit of like, oh, but it's, it's new to me kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a theme there, Mike, just to identify like that you seem to be struggling with this idea that like, not that labor is hard, I think you know that, but that this is the labor you're doing. I'm not going to wear my shirt out kind of thing. Or I'm going to wear my own certain hat until I switch it to the professional hat, So that's something you talk about in therapy, I guess, right?
Yeah. Working at a hamburger restaurant, especially in fast food, is seen as so low level. Mm-hmm. But I have found just a massive amount of respect for all of the people that work there, teens and the pros. I met this 17-year-old kid. We were working drive-through together. He's applying to colleges, and he's doing this job, obviously so much better than me. And he works part-time, and he'll probably never do it again after he goes to college. Uh-huh. And I'm just like, that's amazing. And then over here, there's this person working here for, I think the person who's worked there the longest was this guy that's been working there for 25 years.
Wow.
He's a huge Dodgers fan.
At this restaurant?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if it's only at this restaurant.
At a restaurant.
At a hamburger restaurant, possibly different ones. But watching him work everything during the busiest times where it's just instinct and he's one step ahead of every moment, I was like, I actually aspire to this. This is amazing to me. I was honestly like, just that's the model of where I want to get to.
I hope it's not audible, but there's guys who are digging a ditch right now in our yard. And I went out and I was watching this, and I felt kind of weird about watching it, because I'm just like, I feel horrible being the landowner just standing around, So that's another like kind of class issue. But watching these fellas I was looking at their technique because I'm like, wow, this is completely different than I would dig anything. And like it leads to a hole. There's like a big hole in the backyard where they're putting it's a whole thing. It's a drainage situation. But watching them dig the hole, I had this sort of movie style image of what I thought that labor was, which was, you'd like put the shovel in, you'd get a really heavy mound of dirt, and then you'd fling that out. No, like these guys are doing really small, they're like cutting a lot. They're doing a lot of like whacking of things and then getting seemingly trivial amounts out. But then like an hour later, the hole is like 3 feet deeper, and it's really big. It's like, 5 feet wide or something. It's really, really large. And I'm realizing like, oh, these guys dig ditches and holes and they know stuff. And I think that labor is probably similar to like, I run the fry station and like, this could burn me, or like, and so the efficiency of knowing where to be and how to turn around and how to like communicate if you're going to be moving and all that stuff.
And I think it comes back to that word technique. And this is something that is not actively trained. Like they'll show you how to do things, but you're learning from one trainer over here, and they're kind of showing you the most basic way to do it. But when you watch them do it well and you observe it, you see all of the little tricks.
Yeah, yeah.
Breakfast time, serving the breakfast potato, they come in these little sleeves. And the sleeves are annoying because they stick together. So you have to kind of like pinch the sleeve open.
Crinkle it open.
Then you pick it up with the tongs and you slide in there, and it's kind of annoying. And then you have to do the whole thing again. I'm like, this is so slow. Then I was working the drink station and I look over and I see one of the morning pros. She's like, picks up a stack of these sleeves. She grabs the tongs, closes them, sticks the closed tongs in, widens open the mouth of the first sleeve, grabs the hash brown, slides it in, puts it on the tray, and just does that over and over and over again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful.
And I was like, oh, there it is. There's the secret. I found it, And so again, the first couple of times I was still kind of sloppy with it, but I was like, that's the trick here is observe everyone and find the best way to do all of these different little tasks.
And this has probably been handed down generationally or something, right? Like this technique was developed somewhere and now it's made it to you through, or maybe she made it up,
I vaguely remember something about using the tongs on the small fry sleeve, which is a really similar sleeve in this way of opening it up. But again, it was hours and hours of like watching videos that it just becomes a blur. In fact, when I was training the store manager, she was like giving me a day off between these shifts of watching videos because it's so much information. She's like,
too much. Yeah, right.
Take a break. Like, don't do this all back to back, which in retrospect, I very much appreciate.
Okay, so the thing is, Mike, I have literally hours and hours and hours of questions about this. I feel like if we go to them now, there's no reason to listen to the rest of the season. I mean, there's other reasons. There's the case studies, there's McTrot, there's a lot of other stuff coming up. But I think we should move on for now and go into the case study.
The name of the case study is McDonald's Corporation, Managing a Sustainable Supply Chain, and it's by Ray A. Goldberg and Jessica Droste Yagan. And it's from 2007. Note for our listeners that I didn't know before I read this case study, but soy is pronounced and spelled soya outside of the U.S.
It took me so long in reading this case study to understand what soya was. I obviously first thought like Soylent Green. Like, what are we talking about here? Yeah, I didn't know what product, because it's a feed product is what they're talking about. Zach, this is one of the best case studies I think we've ever read. There's so much amazing detail in here that, unlike many case study, actually pertains to the case study. Often these case studies will give a whole history of McDonald's. It doesn't matter. This case study is about the issue of supply chains and sustainability.
And here's what happened. In 2006, Greenpeace posted an article about how European chicken nugget meat came from chickens that had been fed soy that had been grown in the Amazon under a multinational soy cartel and a billionaire soy governor.
So already the responsibility of McDonald's on one end, and then you have all of these suppliers all the way down to the feed suppliers of the suppliers, is what is implicating McDonald's as at fault in this situation, is pretty amazing. It just shows you the complexity of the supply chain.
This case study gets into some great examples about how deep that supply chain goes for some of these products that wind up in McDonald's food. But the Greenpeace article is making the point that McDonald's suppliers buy their chicken feed from Cargill, which is one of three companies in what's basically a cartel that dominates the global soy trade. And what these companies do is they invest in places like the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso. And by invest, they're really just giving them seeds, fertilizer, herbicides, chemicals, and then taking the soy at harvest and selling it on the soy market.
Zach, I just want to interrupt you and say this is such a great example of what you called the tall poppy effect in a previous episode, where we see McDonald's being targeted by an organization or a group because they're such a powerful brand. Like, no one cares about Cargill. You could do you could say, stop Cargill from doing this thing, and no one would care. But if you put the big McDonald's logo on it, suddenly it has impact. It's a story with legs. It'll get picked up.
And I was thinking about, all of my favorite independent hamburger chains in the Los Angeles area. They probably all buy from something like Cargill, if not, even more problematic. And how would you even go about raising consumer awareness about your favorite hamburger chain may or may not, but probably is buying from this one supplier that you've never heard of?
For most restaurants, everything comes on the Cisco truck. That's the distributor that's connected to all of these other parts, and you don't get to know or care what it is as the customer. It's so rarely presented to you.
So I want to get a little bit more into the sort of the chain of how this happened and how this came to be a Greenpeace article. In the period of around 2003 to 2004, about half of the Amazon that was being deforested was in the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso. And it had been going up. It was like up 30% since 2002 at the time. And Mato Grosso happens to be governed by one Blairo Maggi.
Now, who is that?
Wait. Is this the soy governor that we heard about earlier?
Yeah. Let's listen to some algorithmic YouTube content about Blairo Maggi. This video is titled, "The Billion Dollar Farmer Has Secrets You Need to Know," and it comes from a channel called Down on the Farm.
Blairo Maggi. Blairo is the only non-American or Chinese on this list who is a billionaire. Blairo Borges Maggi was born on the 29th of May, 1956, and is a Brazilian billionaire businessman and former governor of the state of Mato Grosso. Maggi owns the Amaggi Group, a large company that harvests, processes, and exports soybeans and owns soy terminals, highways, and waterways. You could say that Blairo Maggi has the agricultural business in his hood, as he is the son of Andre Maggi, who founded Andre Maggi Group, the largest private soybean producer in the world. The group reported sales of $3 billion in 2012, ensuring a spot for Blairo Maggi on Forbes' list of the richest men in the world. Impressive. The Andre Maggi Group is led by Andre's wife, Lucia, but Bolero Maggi owns more than 16% of the group. The company has interest in fertilizers, energy, rubber extraction, and transportation. Bolero Maggi was elected governor of the Mato Grosso state in Brazil in 2012. Mato Grosso is practically a haven for soybean production. Now, he is a senator representing the state of Mato Grosso, lobbying for the carbon compensation market to prevent farmers from cutting down forests. Good for him.
But he's also, owns this huge soy company, is the governor of this state where half of the Amazon is being deforested. He's the governor. He sets policy about how that is going to happen. And the results at this time in 2003, 2004 are that it's just going up and up.
When I think of deforestation, I don't have an image of what is replacing the lack of forest, like not instinctively. And like, obviously it's these farms, right, that are replacing the forest. And what's funny is I feel like as an American, we have such a reverence for our farmers and small farmers that you're like, well, that doesn't seem so bad, except that like, oh, wait, but we have to maintain the rainforest as well. And they talk about that a little bit in the case study, managing this situation of a lot of these farms are small independent operations, obviously feeding up to bigger distributors. But you don't want to just say, we're not buying from any of these small farmers. At the same time, it's like, can you guys please stop destroying this limited natural resource that is how our planet breathes? Right.
And the Google images of Mato Grosso, if you look on the satellite view, it's sort of incredible to see the shapes and the colors that these farms make as they cut into the dense Amazon rainforest.
The weird, strange browns attacking the dark greens.
Yeah, and in the Pacific Northwest, if you've flown over, if you've looked on the satellite view, you have these checkerboard patterns from how forests are cut in the Pacific Northwest. And it's kind of like a similarly eerie view.
It's interesting in that Pacific Northwest version to see that because it's the intersection of industry and politics coming together, saying you can take timber here, but you have to leave them out here. And so it creates that strange pattern. Whereas, looking at the maps in this Amazon situation, it feels more like just a sweeping encroachment.
And so one of the quotes that I found from this Greenpeace article was, the journey from rainforest to restaurant might sound simple enough, but it has taken a year-long investigation using satellite images, aerial surveillance, previously unreleased government documents, and on-the-ground monitoring to expose. Which is incredible to me that we're going to hear about the sophistication of the McDonald's supply chain and how seriously they take everything. But this activist group was able to seemingly do a way better job than they do at their own work.
It essentially sounds like an intelligence organization putting together all of these different parts and sort of coming up with the evidence that they need in order to launch this campaign.
Exactly, yeah. And so this Greenpeace article led to protests in the UK. People were dressing up like chickens and coming to the restaurants. And it kicked up this rapid response from McDonald's to catch up to Greenpeace.
And it mentions it in the case study that there are these very different regional differences in McDonald's in these different places. I have a hard time believing that protests against a certain kind of chicken feed that was causing deforestation of the Amazon would have any impact in the United States.
Right.
I'm a bit of a pessimist in that way.
Would we even do it?
Yeah, exactly. Like even if it was organized, it'd be a single one-off stunt and would probably disappear.
And if it were a restaurant that were clinging to the edge of existence, like seemingly like Long John Silver's to me, or maybe A&W, it wouldn't have nearly the same effect, I don't think. That people sort of speak for yourself about those restaurants. I'm not trying to diminish them, but I think McDonald's means something to so many people that to have it sort of slighted as evil or corrupt or, nefarious is so much more powerful on the part of Greenpeace.
Yeah, I think one of the takeaways that I had from this entire case study kind of reinforces this feeling I have that everything at scale is bad. Like once you reach a certain scale, you can't help but cause harm because even the smallest little thing will get magnified and multiplied, to this massive, massive degree. And so there is a responsibility that you have as you grow. And many corporations are arguably too big.
In an interesting way, I feel like this case is really about monopoly power and the supposed cartel of soy suppliers. Because in the Ray Kroc history of McDonald's, I think what you would do if you're a franchise or a group of franchise in a city is you would contract out to a bakery for the buns that meet the McDonald's specification, get another bakery on standby for redundancy, or just get orders going there too so that they know how to make it. And if their buns are slightly off spec, cancel your business, go with the other one, find a third bakery. You have lots of choices. And in this case, the genius of McDonald's maybe is having that global or at least regional, very tight specification so that everybody can get exactly what they want. But in the era of sort of like monopolistic conglomerates, they lose a lot of power. McDonald's loses a lot of power to negotiate.
There is an aspect too where McDonald's has to give a certain amount of that power to the suppliers in order to have them be able to provide the sheer amount that they need. Something I took away from this is it's not as top down as you might think. They really are like they made the bed together and they both have to lie in it, both the suppliers and McDonald's. They're sort of dependent on each other and they work together. And I think we see that in this case study. McDonald's doesn't go out and simply cave for the PR reason, and it doesn't maintain and hold its position and just ignore what Greenpeace is saying. It does kind of work to bring these organizations and these people together to try to figure out how to solve the problem.
Very aggressively. As we saw from the 7% stock drop like today about the onion thing, that trust is really important. And the minute it starts to wane or has a problem, there's huge consequences for McDonald's.
One of the things in talking about the supply chain, even with this focus on sustainability, is, they mention that safe products is part of the goal every time they mention the goals of maintaining a robust supply chain and talking about cost and value. But really, they hit safe products, and that just jumped out at me every time I read this case study because of what's happening now. And again, it's not the focus of this particular case study, but they do talk about that redundancy and being able to switch and requiring some of their suppliers to have contingency plans in case of issues like this.
I was struck by what McDonald's calls their 3 primary motivations for caring about any of this stuff, I guess. They are, briefly, continuity. They want to be able to keep the supplies flowing, keep the business running. And then the second one they put in, I don't know if it was the case study author who did this, but somebody put it in scare quotes, doing the right thing.
I think that's a Ray Kroc quote.
Okay.
I think is what their quote comes from.
They have people quoted this is the McDonald's of Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. This guy saying, I want my children to inherit a clean, sustainable world. And that's the one pull quote from this case study where you should, trust the executives that they care about the world. And then the third one is protecting consumer trust, which seems obvious. That's what we're talking about here. I kind of think these 3 primary motivations are a little bit not enough.
Not enough in what way? Do you think it's not what they actually do or mean?
I think it is what they do and what they try to do, but I think it's kind of like a minimum. I think it puts them in a position where we're doing the right thing until we find out, because Greenpeace told us that we're not. And so we'll react to that scandal when it comes. I think they could be way more proactive in their supply chain for reasons that we'll get into, and sort of more transparent and more interested in all of this stuff.
I do get the sense that they want to be proactive.
In many ways, it is amazing how proactive they are. There's Linda Detwiller that they cover her briefly. She went from a career at the USDA to a career at McDonald's. When
I heard that, I was like, revolving door? Is this a problem?
But it's the other way from how you usually hear it. And in this case, what happened is that the slaughterhouses were using I think it's a captive bolt stunner that just pneumatically shoots a metal rod into the cow's brain. But the slaughterhouses had it turned up way too high. And so it was actually shooting the brain into the body of the cow. And I think this was after the era of mad cow disease. And McDonald's grew concerned about this. And Linda Detwiller changed the spec on how they buy beef and how the beef is killed within 2 weeks, they say. And the government took half a decade to sort of codify that into law about the maximum pressure you can use.
And what's interesting is then they give a counterexample where McDonald's was unable to make that change on its suppliers as well. It goes both ways, but there are those certain examples where McDonald's can step in and enforce change. Going back to what we were saying about being proactive, a European executive was quoted as saying, "I was surprised about the soya problem and that upset me." And from that, I started thinking that doing the right thing, in quotes, it sort of represents this let's stay ahead of the scandal, right? And it also, let's create safe food, let's do all the right things, blah, 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 because of good reasons. But primarily, like, they have to maintain the pristine image of that brand. And so they're not doing the right thing to do the right thing to hand it down to their children. They're doing the right thing in order to prevent the stock from sliding 7%.
Yeah, and some of these things that they're doing are really cool. Like, according to the case study, McDonald's Europe had a goal in 2007 of mapping their key supply chains and assessing carbon footprints for beef, chicken, and potatoes. Like, that is so cool. And they had this other sort of set of factoids about how the beef at McDonald's in the USA comes from 6 vendors, which come from 30 abattoirs. And those cattle come from 800,000 ranchers, each with an average of 38 cows. Like, that's such a vast distributed supply that it's sort of amazing that they even know that average number. I was sort of taken by that.
What is an abattoir?
I believe it's a slaughterhouse.
It sounds French. Let's ask Catherine.
Within the English language, the term dates to the early 19th century. However, it comes from the French word abattre. Abattoir is another name for slaughterhouse, where animals are killed and processed into meat products.
The decentralization that they talk about, honestly, it's part of the genius of the franchise system, because you have offloaded so much of your risk onto the owner-operators in exchange for some of the profit. But that Ray Kroc innovation was not to screw over the franchisees by making money, forcing them to use certain suppliers and taking kickbacks and gifts, but to really serve the franchisees with fair sort of enforced structure and relationships with the suppliers. And I think that's an interesting thing, because it puts, especially now as we're watching this happen with presumably some supplier is going to be found as the cause of this E. coli outbreak. And I wonder how much McDonald's will defend that supplier or potentially not name them defensively as a form of that
relationship,
or as a sign of that close relationship.
I will also wonder, does this supplier supply more than onions? How big is the region? Is it just this specific? And would the threat of sort of calling out or shaming such a specific and regional supplier just kind of sour it for all the other suppliers that are doing fine?
And as you modeled with the beef example, you have these small operations that have maybe 35 cattle feeding into the larger. Was it where along the chain was that? And did they potentially sell, let's say it is the onions, into maybe 2 different distributors? So maybe it's not at the distributor level, but at a lower level. Mm-hmm. Tracking all of that, like, is staggering. Like, the global supply chain and that example, like, that blew my mind. I didn't realize. And again, partly I'm like, is this some sort of attempt to them to say, oh, it really is family farms? 35 head of cattle can make its way into the McDonald's system. But yeah, like, that's crazy.
I was taken by, I felt like this case study was like a donut factory that had a glass window while you're waiting in line, and you can see exactly what they're doing in a way that I don't think we've gotten in other case studies about McDonald's.
What's interesting is that was one of the first draws of the original McDonald's when it was owned by the McDonald brothers in San Bernardino, is that they had big open windows so you could actually see into the kitchen. And it's why McDonald's was such an early draw to children, is they could watch what was happening in the back. Mm-hmm. And it's just funny that has both continued and then creates this analogy of being able to see into the supply chain. There was a quote that it was just like, the supply chain isn't really one whole. It's lots of little supply chains pulled together.
Right.
And I really got the feeling that supply chain is like, it's dynamic, it's changing all the time and evolving. Things are shifting, and they have this ability to not immediately switch suppliers, but they can kind of, they have to introduce a new item, or suddenly they're like, okay, now we need the pork for the McRib, but we don't normally need that. And it's not like you set it in place and let it go.
Absolutely.
It's not like the machine that dices the onions. Like, that's, once you have that, you can just keep making those. You can replace the parts, but you've solved that problem. This is a constant, it's never going to be a solved problem.
It makes me sort of wonder and fantasize, at McDonald's headquarters? Do they have like a NASA control room with a giant visualization of all the supplies coming out of the global map and where they're going and ways to sort of drill down and filter and see all that stuff? And it makes me think of, the McDonald's app does an okay job of giving you the nutrition information if you really dig for it. It would be so cool to be able to go one step deeper into the thing I'm buying and seeing like, where is it likely coming from? Where are the suppliers? Where are those suppliers? Just, I want all of that information.
I do think that there is that sort of war room style center in McDonald's, just because the amount of titles that we see just in this case study of, vice president of supply chain AP MEA, corporate vice president, worldwide quality food nutrition, like everything around that supply chain, it just seems like there's levels on levels on levels, and they must have some sort of high level understanding of how all that fits together.
That's sort of, I feel like Greenpeace did their research to uncover just one small slice of that. On the one hand, it sounds impressive when it's described by, like almost all of the people interviewed for this case study, there's a list at the back, are from McDonald's. There's one person from Greenpeace. And it makes me wonder how much of this case study is sort of like McDonald's propaganda, and how is Greenpeace able to do it so much better as an outsider?
Well, motivation for one thing, but I do think it is propaganda in the sense of this case study is coming from Harvard Business School, whose agenda is to teach future executives about how to exist in a world where Greenpeace, it's not out to train Greenpeace executives.
No.
It's to train corporate executives on how to deal with these kind of crises. Like the three main questions that it posits that it wants to kind of have a big discussion about with all of its Harvard Business School students, it's how to prioritize sustainability relative to the other goals like food safety and cost. How should McDonald's reconcile different sustainability expectations around the world with all of the different factors coming in? And then how should McDonald's engage suppliers, activists, and other stakeholders as they build out this sustainable supply chain? So it's coming at it from a very McDonald's-centric, pro-McDonald's point of view.
That's important to identify. It also seems like the quotes and the stories that they pull out of these interviews are very congratulatory of small successes that McDonald's has had.
So there's this quote from the case study, which then quotes what it quotes. So it says, about animal welfare. With the guidance of its Animal Welfare Council in 2000, McDonald's issued its Animal Welfare Guiding Principles, designed to ensure that animals in McDonald's supply chain are, quote, free from cruelty, abuse, and neglect. And it just strikes me that you can't slaughter this amount. You can't raise animals for slaughter and call that free from cruelty, abuse, and like, I eat meat. I know I'm not vegan, but like to try to say that it's not cruel or abuse or neglect to raise as many animals as they're raising simply in order to slaughter them, it just, that disconnect feels like wild to me.
I think there's like two parts to it. There's the fact that we have livestock at all. And then like someone like Temple Grandin, who they quote here, would probably argue there's a certain amount of suffering for the animal that's being slaughtered that is just unnecessary and can be removed.
But that's harm. That's like your harm reduction versus harm elimination.
That's absolutely what I'm saying about like McDonald's and their three priorities. They're just looking to do slightly better than we think. They're just looking to say, look, it's not as horrible as you imagined. We are protecting this 2 Delaware-sized piece of the Amazon.
And I want to shake my fist and be angry about that. And at the same time, a part of me knows that a small change in McDonald's supply chain to be more sustainable, as it says in this case, it could be wildly more effective at making things better than any sort of politician or legal attack ever could. It goes both ways. Like, I don't love that there are companies this big. I think that it is arguably harmful for humanity and culture, and yet there are, and that exists, so we have to interact with them. Without knowing any issue, if someone just put up 2 signs, one was McDonald's and one was Greenpeace, and said, which side are you on? I'm going to default to Greenpeace. And yet, I've never given Greenpeace money, and I do own shares in McDonald's. I'm full of contradictions.
I think there's like no world in which eating beef on a regular day is like sustainable for the entire population of the world. And McDonald's is sort of based on a premise that it could be. As far as I'm concerned, like they can do whatever they want with deforestation in small parts of the Amazon or making their fish supply sustainable instead of raiding the fisheries. They can do these things around the margins, but on the whole, I don't think they add up. And I don't think they add up just for McDonald's, but for so many parts of our food world and our world of consumption. What's appealing to me is that McDonald's has a viewpoint to make this legible. Like they can see it happen on their dashboards. They can quantify it. They can score it in different ways with their scorecards and their metrics. And to me, that's the exciting thing, I guess, is that it's going to be bad, but sort of starting to grapple with how bad, how visible is that badness, and how sort of responsive is it to audits and controls and like regulation is sort of really, I can't help but sort of be enthralled by that idea.
And I think that's kind of the thesis of this entire project that we're doing is McDonald's touches everything. And so by engaging with McDonald's on this issue, we're really looking at any issue and how it practically impacts a specific organization all the way down to us. It's so difficult to not want to get angry and quit working at hamburger restaurants and protest them. Like I have there's a desire in me to do that in some sense. And at the same time, I'm like, no, calm down. We're here to sort of understand and talk about it. And even if you eliminated McDonald's from the equation, there are hundreds of other hamburger restaurants and quick serve restaurants and regular restaurants and it wouldn't solve the problem. It would simply erase one of the participants in this massive ecosystem.
And if this ecosystem is to change, McDonald's has to change with it. And to some extent, McDonald's is going to like market that change. And that's what I'm waiting for.
It'd be amazing to see the mirror case study of this same issue from Greenpeace's point of view that they share in order to teach people this is how you affect change in corporate America. Here's what we're able to do. Target these big brands, go to the table with them, negotiate them, and actually interact. Don't, use the protest as a means to start the conversation to enact change. Because I feel like there is that flip around side where all of these things from the Greenpeace perspective, it's similar, but phrased differently.
Right. And the supply chain investigation, like it was hard, but it wasn't that hard. It was still a workable point of leverage.
Yeah, by a nonprofit, probably with a lot of volunteer effort. Thanks so much for listening to Hamburger Business Review.
We'll be back next week with another case study, more on Mike's Hamburger Restaurant, and the news.
And also, we'll start talking about Zach's annual attempt to eat at every McDonald's in Manhattan in a 24-hour period. Our theme music is from John Bechtolt's Jazz Around.
And our social media manager is Colette Wacker. This is an independent production, and you can support us by signing up at hamburgerbusinessreview.com. You can also buy some merch there. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with you next week.